I think we have people in the room now. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Fall 2024 Western Electricity Markets Training. I am Gabriel Aguilera, Commissioner at the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission and the current chair of the Western Energy Markets Body of State Regulators, or BOSSR. It's great to be with you all today. For those of you who may not be familiar with BOSSR, the body was established in 2015 as part of the governance proposal adopted by the CAISO Board of Governors to address the regional nature of its Western energy imbalance market and now the extended day ahead market. The BOSSR is comprised of one commissioner from each of the utility commissions in which a regulated load-serving utility participates or plans to participate in the CAISO markets. The BOSSR provides a forum for the state commissioners to do a few things. First, to select a voting member of the Western Energy Markets Governing Body Nominating Committee. Second, to learn about and discuss the Western EIM, the EDAM, and CAISO markets. And third, to express a common position in CAISO stakeholder processes or to the WEM governing body directly on any Western EIM or EDAM issues. Today's training reflects our shared commitment to advance the understanding of electricity markets across the West, and we are thrilled to host the BOSSR members, their staff, and other regulators and energy office officials who play a vital role in shaping the energy landscape. So we hope that you find the session informative and enriching and that it provides valuable insights that you can take back to your respective roles and commissions or agencies. Before we begin, though, I want to acknowledge and thank the California ISO for their support and partnership in developing this training. I'd also like to thank Eric Hildebrandt and the rest of the Department of Market Monitoring team. The DMM's role in this in the market is critical and important to understand. And finally, I'd like to thank WEB staff for their part in organizing this training. So thanks again for being here in real time, and I look forward to a productive and engaging day ahead. With that, I'll turn it over to Holly Taylor to provide a few words of welcome on behalf of the CAISO. Holly?
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Aguilera. So on behalf of the California ISO, I am also delighted to welcome you to today's Western Electricity Markets training. Before I get started, I also want to note some thanks to Commissioner Aguilera and the BOSSR for sponsoring this training session, and WEB staff for really helping to coordinate this opportunity for everybody. The state's perspective is really important to the work that we're doing here at the California ISO, and we want to make sure that you have the tools and resources that you need to engage. So I'm happy that you could join us today. I want to note that we are recording today's session and we'll follow up with you with a link to that recording. We did send presentation materials to those that registered to participate in the meeting. If you did not receive those materials, please just email Sienna Levine. She's going to drop her email address into the chat and she will follow up and make sure you get those presentation materials. But we will also, again, share the materials. We'll share a link to the recording, and you're welcome to share those with your teams after today's workshop concludes. So from our team, I want to say that we have Radha Madrigal joining us this morning. Radha is a lead customer education trainer at the ISO. She's a great teacher. She brings a wealth of knowledge, and she's a really great resource. And we also have Milos Bostanik with us. I think many of you are familiar with Milos. He's on standby here to answer your most difficult questions if needed. Milos is our regional markets sector manager, and he's been really very closely engaged with the market development, and he's a prime subject matter expert on our Western energy markets here in the West. So happy to have him on board for when things get really complicated. And as noted previously, we have Eric Hildebrandt with us today from Department of Market Monitoring, who's going to provide you with an overview of his role. So I want to thank you to the BOSSA, thanks LEAD staff, and thanks to the ISO team for joining this morning. And with that, Radha, I'm going to turn things over to you, and we'll keep an eye out for hands. Again, if you didn't get the materials, just send an email to Sienna Levine, SLEVINE @kaiso.com. All right, thanks, Radha.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Radha Madrigal, and I'm the lead customer education trainer here at the California ISO. We're a team of two, and my partner, Heidi Carter, is also on the line as well. I'm going to be taking you through a presentation today about the ISO market and also about some exciting projects that we have in the works. And so I'll go ahead and share my slides with you now so we can get started. All right, if you can just confirm you see my screen.
We can see it.
Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and give me a moment here, and I'm just going to move something around so that I can look at the chat if you have any questions that pop up. I'm going to keep the chat kind of in my line of sight, but if I could rely on Holly and Sienna if people raise their hands, I may not be able to catch that as I'm presenting. So please feel free to put questions in the chat or raise your hand and ask a verbal question as we go through the material. I have about 50 slides to go through with you over about 2-ish hours, so there's definitely time built in for you to ask questions. As Holly mentioned, the slide presentation and also a document called KAISO reference material was sent out to you as well. And so if you did not get that, if you'll reach out to Sienna for that, it'll be a copy of the presentation, and throughout the presentation, I may refer to other links or other pieces of information that I think would be helpful. And so it kind of collected all of that information for you in a reference document. And so you'll see that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. Like I said, feel free to ask your questions. Really, this session was designed for you so that we could share information with you. So we're going to dive into first how things work today. We're going to talk about the ISO's day-ahead and real-time markets. We're going to talk a little bit about market pricing, and then a little bit later, we're going to review the extended day-ahead market and day-ahead market enhancements projects, and wrap up the discussion at the end with a little bit of a touch on how we settle the market financially. So first of all, asset owners and load-serving entities, as well as demand response providers and convergence bidders, participate in the day-ahead and real-time markets. And these companies are all scheduling coordinators, or they have contracted with scheduling coordinators to participate directly in the market. And they are financially and physically responsible for the associated trades that are cleared in the market. In addition, we have in real time our Western Energy and Balance Market participants, each individual balancing authority there, as well as the scheduling coordinators within those balancing authority areas that participate in the real-time market. And then in real time, the energy flows across the transmission system and is distributed to customers by local utilities. Now here in the mix of all the players and how everyone is involved, the ISO, we are not a market participant in the regional markets that we operate. We have no financial interest in the outcome of these markets. We are the independent market operator, and so we facilitate day-ahead trades in the day-ahead time frame and real-time market. However, we don't take title to, nor are we obligated to deliver any of the energy that is bought and sold in our markets. We are the facilitator of that. We have a great frequently asked questions document on EDAM that explains some of our additional responsibilities that we have as a balancing authority. That is one of the links that I have shared with you in the KAISO reference material document that we distributed along with the presentation, so you may want to refer back to that. And it gives kind of further information about the ISO and our role as the market operator. So before we take a look at how the ISO market is evolving, I thought it would be good to start off with a baseline of how things work today. So that's where we'll start. Balancing authority areas today outside of a market versus how they would participate in a market. I kind of drew up a couple of thoughts for you. So the first image in the top left is each individual balancing authority as they are managing loads and resources within their border. And then below the line, you see an image, a visual depiction of what it would look like for balancing areas to be participating in a market and offering excess supply to the larger market footprint and also purchasing supply from that larger footprint. And so I've got a couple of talking points that I'll share with you on this. From the perspective of participating in the market, really, if you are outside of a market, then as a balancing area, you're really focused on balancing your schedules. You're making sure that load-serving entities within your area identify your suppliers. The balancing area is making sure that the load-serving entity demand equals the supplies that are available and making sure that each load-serving entity is sufficient. Now, in this type of setup, there are some drawbacks, and that is that these load-serving entities may lose the economic benefits of having access to a larger regional supply. And on the supply side, there may be a limited number of load-serving entities that they have to serve. And there's also, in addition to this statement here, there's also reliability benefits and environmental benefits. I'll talk more about those as we explore the extended day-ahead market and opening up the day-ahead market to a wider footprint. But this was a couple of talking points there. And then on the market side, when a balancing area starts to participate in a market, then the market changes the concept of a load-serving entity needing to come in with a balanced schedule. Instead, these load-serving entities independently bid in their demand, and resources independently bid in the supply, and then the market is the one that determines the best way to meet that demand based on the supply that has been bid into the market. So this gives load-serving entities access to a larger footprint of suppliers, and resources have access to more customers, a larger pool of customers. The market, as I mentioned, is the one that finds the most economic solution to figure out which supply will meet which demand at least cost while respecting transmission constraints and other considerations. So that's kind of to tee up the conversation of market participation. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I don't know if you can take a look at what line is open and mute that. That'd be helpful. If you wouldn't mind muting your lines unless you have a question, that would also be great. So I'm going to dive into the day-ahead market processes, and like I said, if you have questions as we go through the material, feel free to raise your hand or put notes in the chat. I will also pause periodically just to check in with you as well. So we're going to start off with the day-ahead market processes. This diagram here is a visual depiction of how we're operating the market across both day-ahead and real-time. We're going to focus on the top portion of the slides here for this section of the day-ahead. So the day-ahead market opens 7 days before the trade date or the operating day, and then it closes 10 a.m. the day before. So it's 9:17 right now, Pacific time. So at 10 o'clock this morning, the market will close for tomorrow's trade date or operating day. And then the market will go through a series of processes. So we're going to take a look at what those are now here and kind of dig into them at a little bit more granularity. And then we will, after we discuss the day ahead, then we'll get into the real-time market activity. So the first process is the day-ahead market. It's called market power mitigation. The second is the integrated forward market, and third is residual unit commitment. I will go into each one individually and describe for you what they do. But these three processes take place in the 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. time frame. And then after these processes have concluded, the market results publish, and that is what triggers the opening of the real-time market. And then at that time, at about 1300 this afternoon, when the real-time market opens, each individual trade hour will be open up until 75 minutes before that hour. And there's also additional timing that I'll go over with you when we get to the real-time section, but this is kind of a quick snapshot to let you know the elements that we're going to be talking about and kind of a bit of the order as well. So I'm going to, before I start diving into each individual step, I want to kind of encourage interactivity. So I thought I would pause here and just see if anybody already has any burning questions that they'd like to ask before we get into it. I want to kind of encourage you to speak up when you have questions that arise. So if you have any questions, put it in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and I'll go ahead and address those. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Are there any hands raised that you're seeing?
There are no hands at this time.
Okay, I'll go forward. So we're going to walk through each individual market process now. We'll start off with market power mitigation, which is the first process in the day-ahead market. And the goal here is to essentially make sure that units that have the potential for market power are not able to exercise that market power by the nature of where they reside. So the image that I'm showing you here on the left is one supplier who possibly has the ability to charge as much as they want because demand is going to need access to that supply, versus the second circle that you see on the slide here shows a variety of players in that area, and then having more bids in a specific location encourages competitiveness of that location. So at times, there can be localized congestion that can result in market power being exercised. Market power is the ability of a single entity or group of entities to influence prices or manipulate market outcomes due to their significant market share. The market power mitigation process detects and mitigates or lowers the bids in those particular cases to ensure that prices remain competitive throughout the system. So there is essentially a pricing run that's done to determine where those congested areas are. And then if there are, we call them, let's see, I think it's called, oops, my notes popped away for a second here. Yeah, so there's, if we have a constraint that is, let me back up here for a second while I catch my thoughts. Essentially what we do is we take a look at the system, and there's specific areas, these localized congested areas that we've described. In those areas where there's a limitation, perhaps to the access of to the energy that the suppliers are bidding in, there's an analysis that's done to determine if, without these larger or more pivotal suppliers, is that specific area competitive or not competitive. If it's deemed to be not competitive, then we take a look at the bids that were submitted and we lower them to a previously determined number, which is called the default energy bid. And just because, I'll go to the next slide here, just because a supplier has the potential for market power does not necessarily mean that they're exercising it, meaning that their bid could very well be in the competitive range and not be adjusted. So we do an analysis of the bids that were submitted and we replace them with the higher of either their default energy bid or the competitive LMP for generating resources. LMP means locational marginal price. So there's a pricing run that's done at the beginning of this process to determine what competitive prices would be. And then we take a look at the bids that were actually submitted to discover whether they're in that area, in that range, or whether they need to be mitigated or lowered. Now, when a resource begins to participate in the ISO market, there is a determination or a selection of the type of calculation they would like to use for this default energy bid. I've listed the different bid options on the screen here for you, and so what you'll see is that depending on the type of resource, so for example, there are storage options, there's options for hydro, there's variable cost options, perhaps if you are a gas-fired resource where the price of gas impacts your pricing structure, then you'll pick one of these variable cost options. So you'll select the type of default energy bid calculation that you would like to use for your resource in the event that we need to mitigate or lower those bids that were submitted. I see a note here in the chat, so I'm going to read that here. When I hear congestion, am I to interpret that as primarily congestion due to transmission constraints and lack of physical transfer capacity? Yes, that's what we're talking about. And so, if there is not enough transmission available to get the supply, energy from the supply to meet that demand, then there's only so much that can flow along specific lines. Then we will see that congestion occur. Thanks for the question. Let's see. The next question says, when you generate LMPs, do you make congestion assumptions? So when we generate the LMPs, there are 3 components, and we'll talk, I have a market pricing section coming up a little bit later, but I will kind of just touch on it briefly here. So when we do the LMP, it's made up of 3 components: energy, congestion, and losses. So yes, there's calculations that are done to determine the amount of congestion based on the bids that were submitted and the transmission capabilities of the lines. So we have a full network model and a power flow solution that we kind of take a look at to help us determine that. There's another question that says, is there a reference guide that explains the variations in the default energy bids calculations? Yes, there is. If you, on this slide, if you take a look over in the left-hand side, it says ISO tariff section 39.7.1. So that specific section of the tariff will outline each one of these default energy bid options, and then you'll see how those break down. And they're also further referenced, I believe it's in the Market Instruments Business Practice Manual. So I'm not sure. I think I have a link to the Market Instruments BPM in the reference guide, but I will double check that. And if not, I'll send that out with an update. So this was really brief, but how market power mitigation works. And essentially the goal of market power mitigation is to take a look at the bids that were submitted, determine if there are any bids that are not competitive, and then mitigate or lower those to either what the default energy bid calculation determines is the correct number, or to the LMP that was determined during the pricing run, whichever is higher. And I have some notes here that I wanted to share with you about that. Okay, so the purpose of the competitive LMP, we essentially use that as a floor to prevent situations where the default energy bid would maybe be too low given the market conditions of that specific time. So before we move on from market power mitigation, the output of this process is what we call a clean set of bids that we bring on to the next process. So before we step into the next process, I wanted just to check to see if there are any lingering questions about this specific market power mitigation process. All All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. And it sounds like there's no hands raised, so I'll move on to the next process. So we receive, and when I say we here, I'm actually talking about the market engine and the market system. So I have a bad habit of saying we as a person when I mean the system. So the ISO system, the market engine takes in all of this information, receives the clean set of bids from the market power mitigation process, and now the next step, which is called the integrated forward market, is where we clear bid-in supply against bid-in demand. So this is where load-serving entities in the day-ahead market are submitting their demand bids, and suppliers in the day-ahead market are submitting their supply bids. We clear those bids against each other, and then what comes out of that are day-ahead schedules and virtual awards. Now, a point here that I wanted to make is because we are clearing bid-in supply against bid-in demand, there may not be sufficient capacity committed to meet what the forecasted demand is. And so we have a third step, which is called residual unit commitment, that is designed to help address that nuance. And so I'll explain more about how that works during step 3. But the takeaway from this step is this is where we're clearing bid-in supply against bid-in demand. This is where we're determining energy awards for the particular hours, each of the 24 hours in the day-ahead time frame. Another thing that we're doing in the day-ahead market is procuring 100% of reserves for the California ISO Balancing Authority area. So ancillary services awards are procured and awards are given out. Ancillary services are essentially, we've got a variety of products. So there's called spinning reserves and non-spinning reserves, as well as other products, which for some reason it just popped right out of my head what the second product was called. So I know it'll pop right back in there in a moment. And so we procure these reserves and the day-ahead time frame based on the maximum of what we call 3 different factors, either a certain percent of the load forecast or the most severe single contingency, and also a certain percent of forecasted solar production. Okay, there we go, regulation up and down. I knew that would pop back into my head. So there's 4 different ancillary services products. There's regulation up and regulation down, and those types of resources are connected to the ISO system using what we call automatic generation control. So we can move or adjust the output of these resources every 4 seconds, and that's the regulation up and down. And then the spinning reserves are another type of capacity that basically has resources available and able to provide their energy within 10 minutes if needed. So the integrated forward market process, the goal of this process is to commit or select which resources are going to be turned on in the day ahead, or turned on as a result of the day ahead awards and providing their energy in real time. When you see this word commit, I want you to think that that means that we are selecting or turning on a resource. And so that's what that is in that context. I also wanted to share a little bit of a breakdown further into how we clear the bids, supply bids against demand bids. So we've got an economic curve here that shows that the market clears at a certain volume where supply, which is the green line in the upward direction, and demand bids, which is the blue line in the downward direction, where those 2 bid curves cross in this particular hour. So this we're looking at an energy market price for each of the 24 hours and day ahead. So where these 2 bid curves cross, that determines the total cleared demand for that specific hour and also sets the market clearing price for energy. So the price for energy will be the same across the entire system for each of these for each of the locational marginal pricing points, but what What makes a difference in the price are the other components, congestion and losses. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about market pricing after we discuss day ahead in real time. This is the way it works today, where the price of energy is the same across the entire system. When we move into EDAM implementation in 2026, there will be a balancing area specific price of energy for each of the specific 24 hours. So there'll be a CAISO BA energy price for hour ending 12, let's say, and there'll be a separate energy price for each of the other balancing areas. So that will clear in their BAs. So that's a little bit of a difference of how things work in the future, but today the ISO BA is the only one in the day-ahead market, and so we've got the market clearing price for energy is the same across the whole footprint. In the future, that'll be broken up into different balancing areas. Another element of this chart that I wanted to share with you is if we take a look at the front sections of these charts, you'll see flat lines. Those lines are used to indicate what we call self-schedules. A self-schedule can be submitted either from the demand side or the supply side, and it's essentially a bid that contains megawatts but has no price associated with it. So a self-schedule on the demand side is essentially saying, I am going to procure a certain amount of energy tomorrow, hour ending 12, and I'm willing to pay whatever that market clearing price is. And then on the supply side, a similar self-schedule would be, I'm going to be operating in a specific time period, and I'm willing to receive whatever that market clearing price is. So we call self-schedules, they're also called price takers because they're willing to accept whatever that market clearing price is. So you'll see those represented here at the beginning of the economic curves because they're not sending any economic signal. And then finally, I wanted to share another element about bidding with you before we move on to the next process. Here we've described that suppliers are submitting bids, either self-schedules or economic bids that have megawatts and prices associated with them. And so you may be thinking, well, how does the market figure out which resource to commit, which one to select and turn on so that they'll be generating that energy in real time? And so the visual here shows you a variety of suppliers all submitting bids within the same range, but we have something called the security constrained unit commitment process. And security constrained, those words in there essentially mean that we are respecting the physical limitations of the system or the capacity of the transmission capability of the lines, where we want to run them in a certain, at a certain level. So the market is not just looking at the energy bid, but it's actually called a three-part energy bid, which includes information on the startup cost, which is a one-time cost. How much does it cost to turn on this resource? The minimum load cost, which is an hourly cost, essentially how much does it cost to run this resource over that particular trade or operating hour? And then finally, that energy bid curve is those bids that we've been talking about. Where I am at my minimum load, how much will it cost to, how much am I bidding in and expecting to receive if I increase that output to various ranges and I tie an economic signal to that by supplying different price ranges that I'm, from the supply perspective, that I'm expecting to receive if I'm going to be generating energy. So the ISO market uses this security constrained unit commitment process to determine which resources to select. The goal of this process, the objective, is to minimize startup and minimum load costs, bid in energy costs, ancillary services cost, and also look at the network and resource related constraints over that entire time horizon. So we're talking 24 hours. And the goal is to maximize economic efficiency while relieving network congestion, and therefore it considers physical constraints. And the goal here is to achieve a least cost resource commitment and scheduling. So security constrained, those words essentially meaning we're respecting the network and resource-related constraints. And then the unit commitment part of that process is essentially selecting which units are going to be started up and running. I see a note in the chat here, so I'm taking a look at that. When I hear self-schedules and price takers, are these also what I should think of when I hear about must-run resources? That would be a good way of thinking about that, Jason, because those resources that fall into that must-run category may likely or possibly could be submitting self-schedules for their resources. But there's certain, I don't remember exactly where in the business practice manual it refers to must run, but there is some additional language about that that goes into the nuance there. I believe that's in the market operations BPM. But yeah, that's kind of along the lines that you should be thinking of. Now, before we move on to the next slide, which is going to start talking about the third process, I wanted to kind of recap process 2, because we talked for a little bit of time about it before we move on to that next section. So the goal of the integrated forward market process, we're clearing bid and supply against bid and demand, and the market is determining energy awards and also awards for ancillary services. The market will select which resources it's going to commit for the 24 hours of the coming trade day. And as I mentioned, we're clearing bid and supply against bid and demand. And so here we may not have procured everything we need to meet forecasted demand. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in process 3. But before we do that, are there any additional questions about the integrated forward market process that I can answer for you here? All right, I don't see anything in the chat. I assume that you'll holler if you see hands raised, so we'll move on. The third process of the integrated forward or of the day-ahead market, and the final process, is called residual unit commitment. So remember, unit commitment is selecting which resources that the market is going to select and turn on and have running. And a residual is, additional. And the goal of this process, essentially, and we've got it here as the first block piece, is reliability. So from the purpose of ensuring grid reliability, we need to make sure that we have enough supply lined up for the forecasted demand for the coming trade date. So we take a look at a number of different resources. There are bids that are submitted into what we call RUC, or residual unit commitment. So we'll examine the RUC bids that were submitted. Here in California, there's a resource adequacy program, and part of that resource adequacy program has with it what we call a must-offer obligation for that resource adequacy capacity. So the market will expect to see bids from those resources in this RUC process. The goal of this is to take a look at the coming day and figure out if there's any additional supply that needs to be procured in those trade hours, each of the 24 trade hours for the coming day. If a resource receives an award for residual unit commitment, what they do in real time is turn around and submit an energy bid into the real-time market so that we can call upon that resource if, in fact, it's needed. The residual unit commitment process uses the same optimization that was used in the security constrained unit commitment process during the integrated forward market. And it takes a look at the demand forecast because we are moving toward actual generation of energy in the real-time market when we're examining what is occurring. In the RUC process, we actually remove any of the virtual bids or the convergence bids from the equation. Those virtual bids are financial participation only. And so we remove any virtual supply or virtual demand bids from the calculation to take a look at the actual physical supply that cleared the market compared to the forecast, and look to see if we need to procure any additional capacity to bridge that gap. In the RUC process, we're also taking a look at the ISO forecast for variable energy resources and what their expected output might be. So we may make some adjustments here based on the expectations using the forecast that we have for those variable energy resources. I've got a graph here that shows you how the RUC process works. So similar to how we're clearing bids in the integrated forward market, supply against demand, in RUC, what we essentially do is remove the virtual bids from that equation to determine the total cleared physical supply and demand compared to the forecast of actual demand, and we use RUC to essentially bridge that gap. Now here today, we have this process where we procure additional capacity in this residual unit commitment process. A little while later, I'll show you how we're transforming RUC with the day-ahead market enhancements and instead adding an additional capacity product called reliability capacity. So I just kind of wanted to put a little bit of a post-it note in your brain that this is how we do it today, but we're also changing that in the future, and so I'll fill in those blanks for you when we get to that future projects section. The goal of RUC is to make sure that we have enough capacity available to meet that forecasted demand. And so we want to make sure that going into that operating day, we have all the supply lined up to meet what we have forecasted the need to be. Do I have any questions, any additional questions about RUC and how it works? This would be a good time to check in with you on that.
I do not see any hands.
Okay. I don't see anything in the chat, so I'll...
Wow, noise in my ears, but good to see you.
Oh, Holly, I hear you. All right. And one other thing that I wanted to share about RUC is that RUC looks out further than the next trade date. This is another item that how we do it today versus how we'll do it in the future. So we have something called a RUC look ahead, and it looks out a couple of days. We're actually changing it so that RUC is not going to do that anymore. Instead, we're instituting some other processes. So today, we look out a couple of different trade dates to account for extremely long start resources, resources that have a startup time greater than 18 hours. And so, there's also some resources on the interties that have to receive their commitment instructions by 0600 instead of 1300. And so this piece of the RUC process is designed to provide that information out as needed. However, we're going to be kind of changing the way that looks as well. And so another thing that just wanted to point out for you, like this is how it works today, but that's going to be changing as well. I've reached the end of the day-ahead market processes. So integrated forward market and residual unit commitment are the processes that are generating these results. And the first process, market power mitigation, is essentially ensuring that the bids that are being used by those market processes are in competitive ranges. Before we kick off the real-time market processes, any final questions either about those processes or just about the day-ahead market as a whole? No? Okay. A little bit of a quiet group today. I want to kind of encourage you to speak up if you have questions. Really, this is designed for you. So we prepared some slides to kind of share information with you, but don't hesitate to reach out and raise your hand or ask a question because really the goal of this session is to make sure that you have the information that you need as you're evaluating EDAM or as you're working with the California ISO or your states are interfacing with our organization. So anything that you'd like to ask, feel free to do so. All right. So
they lowered it, but if you wanted,
oh,
the person that raised your hand, if you did want to ask a question, go ahead.
Hi, this is
Yeah,
Roseanne. Yeah, sorry, I had a little trouble signing in to the meeting, and I don't also have the slides up, so I missed the first like 15 minutes. So you might have gone over this, but I guess I just want to review in my head. So you've got basically the self-supply that offers into the forward market and the self-demand, and that's sort of like the baseline load, and then you take in what is the next marginal offering, both in the supply and the demand, and you look at you match that, and then you go into the RUC process. Is that what I'm understanding is the integrated part?
yes. So the integrated forward market is the part where we take self-schedules and the economic bids from suppliers, from the supply and demand side, and we match those two together. That generates, we call it the integrated forward market because we are producing awards for energy and for ancillary services as well. So we're co-optimizing the procurement of energy and ancillary services. That is what happens in IFM. And then, yes, after that has been determined, then we move on to the RUC process. And the RUC process is more of a reliability function where we take a look at everything that cleared the market compared to what the forecast is of the coming day to see if we need to procure any additional supply to meet what that forecasted demand is expected to be. Does that help paint a picture for you of how it works?
Yes, and then what I'm understanding now is that in the RUC process, that is not when capacity is considered. That's the next step after the RUC process. Is that right?
The RUC process, so in the IFM, the integrated forward market, there is some capacity products being considered there. Those are the ancillary services. And RUC is just looking at residual unit commitment capacity offers. So there's, in the integrated forward market, we're also procuring what we call ancillary services, so regulation up and down, spinning and non-spinning reserves. So that's one type of capacity that's procured in one of the processes. And then this residual unit commitment takes into account this other type of capacity, which is called RUC, which is essentially comparing what we did procure already in IFM, comparing that to what the forecast is to make sure if there's any extra we need to procure that we can do that in the day-ahead time frame.
Okay.
And
in my mind,
yeah.
capacity is the amount that the line can actually deliver. And then my question my mind starts to go to like distribution and DERs and that sort of thing. But that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Sure thing. Yeah, we, as part of determining which resources to select, there is the analysis of the capacity of the line. And so that's part of the calculation, but from when you're hearing me say that word, primarily I'm talking about the capacity products, the market products that we're using. Now, from the slide perspective, if you could reach out to Sienna Levine, you can see her on the list of participants. She'll be able to, if you give her your email address, she'll be able to send you a copy of the slide presentation and also the reference material so that you can follow along.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
I can see the slides now, but I wasn't in the beginning, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, great.
We do have another hand from Benedict.
Okay, I'm going to go back to this slide. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a short question just to logically understand this. Like, why are the demand bids not the same as the load forecast? Wouldn't all load serving entities just bid in demand that is in line with their load forecast?
So good question. It is possible that demand bids will be the same as the forecast for some load serving entities, but perhaps not all. There is not a tariff requirement to bid in 100% of your forecast. So in the day-ahead time frame, load serving entities are essentially figuring out how much demand they'd like to lock in day ahead at a specific identified price versus in the real-time market. In real time, we provide energy based, or the market clears based on the forecast. So in real time, there is no opportunity for a demand or from the demand side to submit bids. We are just running the market to the forecast. The day-ahead market gives demand participants an opportunity to think of it as prepaying or pre-buying for a certain amount of energy in each one of those hours. So they may have some variability or uncertainty in how much they're actually going to consume each one of those hours. So based on their demand bids, the goal is to lock in a certain amount of energy at a desired price. And then in real time, if I'm a load serving entity, whatever my area is consuming over and above the amount of megawatts that I procured in day ahead, I will pay for that at the real time price. So it's more a financial decision that helps them determine how much they want to bid in the day ahead. You will see the ISO send out notices, especially if we're in tight supply conditions, generally during the summertime. If we're really reaching peak hot days, you may see a notice issued that encourages the demand side participants to bid in their full load forecast, so we can make sure that that gets cleared in the day ahead. There's not actually a requirement to bid 100%. That's why you'll see some variability, and not just from a quantity perspective, but also because the day ahead market is clearing based on price. We're really lining up suppliers who are saying, I will generate at these prices, and we're lining up the demand side that says, I will use energy or procure energy at these prices. And so there's a price and quantity determination that essentially decides how much energy gets cleared in the day ahead. So there's a little bit more color there to the discussion. Does that help answer your question?
No, yeah, that was an excellent explanation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. Are there any other hands?
I do not see any other hands.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move on now to real time. So everything we just talked about from a day ahead perspective, think of that as planning and getting ready for and being positioned appropriately to respond to whatever is going to actually happen in real time. So we make great plans, and then we have to see, does the demand show up in real time, and how does that work? And if we need to procure additional supply or not. So in the real-time market, we have additional players. The real-time market has a larger footprint. This is where the Western Energy Imbalance Market participants are also in the market. At this time, WEIM participation is for energy only and does not include those ancillary services that I discussed. You'll see that when we talk about EDAM, we're going to start self-providing ancillary services in the EDAM, so we're heading into that direction, but it's something that is not fully integrated yet. Load forecasts, as I was mentioning, load forecasts for each entity drive the market awards. So in the real-time market, each entity, each balancing area, ensures that they have enough resources available for their area on an hourly basis. We have something called the Hourly Resource Sufficiency Evaluation. You can see a series of tests at the bottom of the screen there that have the check marks above those. Essentially what we're doing in this time frame is making sure that Each of the participants are entering into the market with sufficient resources to cover their forecast amount plus an additional cushion. Every hour, the real-time market conducts a series of tests that's referred to as the resource sufficiency evaluation. These tests essentially make sure that WEIM entities have enough supply and dispatch ramping capability available to the market. So you'll see different balancing is, do we have enough supply to meet demand? Bid capacity is, do we have enough available over and above what we think might be needed? Flexible ramping test is to make sure we have that dispatch ramping capability. And then the feasibility test, we were talking about the transmission system itself and essentially making sure that it's physically able to, that the awards essentially are physically able to run based on the setup of the system. So in this case, the rating of the line and how much energy can flow across each line. Is it actually feasible for these market awards to run in that manner? So those series of 4 tests are done every hour as part of the Western Energy Imbalance Market participation. And then in real time, we're also consuming additional information that the market is analyzing. So the market in real time takes into account some day ahead information, the setup of the system, the schedules for energy, the reserves, so ancillary services, and then we have something called the master file, which is essentially a large database that contains resource characteristics for all of the generators that are participating in the footprint, not just the ISO, but also the Western Energy Market population as well. So all of that data from day ahead, plus new real-time inputs. So there's something called the state estimator, which takes into account the state of the system. There's additional bids that we're receiving in real time, energy bids, and also in the ISO footprint, bids for ancillary services. From the Western Energy Market participation footprint, we also have base schedules that those resources are submitting. Now, this concept of a base schedule is because today in WEIM, there is no day-ahead participation, so there's no day-ahead schedule to set as a baseline for real-time market activity. So in WEIM, resources come in and submit a base schedule, essentially saying, this is my operating schedule for the particular hour, and then depending on the type of resource, they may also have economic bids that they're offering over and above that base schedule. You'll see when I wrap up this discussion at the end of the day that base schedules go away when we talk about EDAM, because all resources will be participating in the day-ahead market if they are participating in EDAM. And so that's another thing to kind of keep in your mind. Another thing that we take a look at in real time is, are there any outages that need to be considered or factored into the calculation, both on the generation side and also on the transmission system? And then finally, those transmission limits. So that's where we're talking about the line capacity of the system. All of that information is calculated by the real-time market, and then there is information that is provided by the real-time market depending on whether it's hourly, every 15 minutes, or every 5 minutes. There's different things that are happening. So if we look at the top of this chart here, in the blue section, real-time dispatches is the first thing that I've got stated there. The market is doing that every 5 minutes, essentially issuing instructions to resources for what they need to do in the next 5 minutes. The remaining items in the middle there, those 3 items, are all done in the 15-minute market time frame. So reserve awards in the ISO BA, startup and shutdown instructions, and also any transitioning from one configuration to another on our various multi-stage generators that are in the fleet. So those activities take place every 15 minutes. And then the last line there on the slide where it says settlements, we settle activity from the day-ahead market in hourly intervals and from the real-time market in both 15-minute and 5-minute intervals. And at the end of today, I will discuss with you a little bit about settlements, and I'll kind of break down the transactions for you so that you'll see how they fall into those hourly 15-minute and 5-minute categories. So the real-time market takes in a lot of information, and I wanted to go through this timeline with you to show you the various things that happen depending on essentially the slice of day that you're looking at. So in real time, about 4.5 hours ahead, we start taking a look at the forecast over that time period, and we have something called short-term unit commitment. So the market looks out 4.5 hours to determine if there are any additional resources that we need to commit or start up. And so we'll do that in this time frame. And then 75 minutes prior to that specific trade hour or operating hour, the market for that hour closes, and that's when the submission deadline is for the bids that have been submitted. From our Western Energy Imbalance Market partners, we have a deadline of 40 minutes before the trade hour for when those base schedules are due. And then there's a little bit of, so those are the things that happen leading up to the hour, and then 15 minutes ahead of the energy flow, we have these schedules that are put out for the 15-minute market, and essentially instructing a resource to adjust their output or to start up or shut down a resource. If you're receiving instructions in this time frame, those resources will be paid the 15-minute market price for that activity. And then finally, there's a 5-minute instruction that you get 5 minutes ahead of energy flow. And those 5-minute instructions are essentially, we schedule you in the 15-minute market and you get re-optimized in the 5-minute increments. And so in that case, if you're getting a re-optimized instruction, you'll be paid for that activity at the real-time price. Let's see, I'm looking at a question from Chris. Is the base schedule a financial commitment by a resource like a self-schedule award or just a forecast? It's different than a self-schedule in the from the ISO market or the settlements perspective. There is no settlement activity out of the ISO market for a base schedule. The base schedule is used as a foundation or a baseline for the resources output. The Western Energy Imbalance Market is the energy imbalances, so any energy above or below that base schedule is what gets settled in the real-time market. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If I have a resource that has a base schedule of 100 megawatts and it shows that that resource provided only 100 megawatts in that time frame, there is no ISO market settlement to go along with that activity. We settle the imbalances. So a resource has a base schedule of 100 megawatts, and then in real time, they have economic bids on top of that. And so they received an instruction to generate an additional 20 megawatts. The extra 20 megawatts is something that would be financially settled in the real-time market in the ISO market settlements process. That is how it works today in WEIM. The base schedule activity is not settled within the ISO market. That's just with the balance, that's just your own BA handles that themselves. We manage the energy imbalances. I hope that answered your question, Chris. If you need more clarity, let me know. Okay, good. So this chart here walks through the milestones, and I don't want you to get too tripped up on all of the acronyms that I'm about to share with you because they can be confusing, but that's kind of why I've laid it out in this, what looks like a table here, to essentially show you what happens across each one of those time frames that I just explained. So the short-term unit commitment process, this happens once per trade hour. We take a look 4.5 hours out, and we figure out if we need to start up or shut down any resources to meet that anticipated demand. We also have something called the hour ahead scheduling process, or HASP. This is for our intertie transactions. So you have the ability to submit bids into the ISO market from an intertie location. Essentially, I'm a resource outside of the ISO BA bidding into the BA, or I have supply inside of the ISO BA and I'm going to be sending it out across the interties to demand outside of our footprint. That's this intertie activity. I want to also be clear that this is not WEIM activity. The transfer of energy through the WEIM market activity happens in a different way, not through these intertie bids. These are individual bids here that I'm talking about, so that's separate. I just want to separate that. It's separate from the WEIM market activity. And then finally, as we're getting closer to the intervals of time and making them smaller, now we'll talk about what happens every 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, we are starting up or shutting down resources. We're transitioning multi-stage generators. The ISO is procuring ancillary services as needed for the ISO BA, and then it's producing what we call advisory instructions. So we have a binding instruction for a specific 15-minute market interval, and then advisory or advisory instructions for others leading out into the future. And the goal here is the market wants to give the resource a heads up as to where it think it will be over those future intervals, but not actually go there until they receive that dispatch. Speaking of dispatches, every 5 minutes, the market is issuing instructions to all of the resources that are on and operating to have them adjust their output or hold their output. You could receive a dispatch instruction to be at the same level. If you take a look at an analog clock, you'll see that we have time sliced into 5-minute intervals. And so the market will issue an instruction in the middle of each of those 5-minute intervals to those resources that are on and operating, telling them where they need to be in the next 5 minutes. And so that's kind of how it works. We took the market, the specific trade day leading into that from a day ahead perspective, and we broke that trade day into 24 hours. And so in day ahead, the market is solving for all 24 of those hours and setting a plan. And then in real time, we take each individual hour as it comes. We look at the forecast of demand for that hour, and we basically adjust the supply to meet what the needs of demand are. So we're always balancing or adjusting supply to meet the needs of the demand that are appearing on the grid. And so as we get closer and closer to actual real time, you'll see that the resources get adjusted around, and then that 5-minute instruction that you get 5 minutes before you're supposed to be operating at that level is kind of that final fine-tuning of where those resources need to be. So I kind of took you on a journey of from day ahead, looking at all 24 hours together, and then leading into real time. There's some things we do 4.5 hours ahead, some things we do 1 hour ahead, and then we break down the instructions to the resources in 15-minute and 5-minute chunks. So with that, before we get into pricing, I wanted to give us another opportunity for a question break. So let's go ahead and do that here. Any questions about the day ahead market or the real-time market and how those work?
I don't see any hands.
Okay. Let me do a time check. So when do we have a scheduled break? I have about maybe 10 more minutes to that, or?
I actually do see one hand from Chris, and then
Okay.
I'll look when the break is.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, is the existence of the 15 and the 5-minute market the reason they both exist just to kind of provide extra level of optimization compared to if you just had like the 15-minute market alone?
Good question. It's actually, they're doing different things. So if you think of I like to think of it as an orchestra. And so in the 15-minute market time frame, we're bringing in a specific section. So we're moving or configuring or moving around the big rocks. So in the 15-minute market is when we're deciding what resources to start up or shut down, and what generators in the multi-stage generator category should we transition from one configuration to another. So we're kind of setting up all of the players, you know, bringing in the different sections. And then in the 5-minute market, for all of those resources that are on or that have just been started up to be on, now we're directing them to go and fine-tuning their output. So the 15-minute market sets up all of the resources and has them start up or shut down. The 5-minute market is when we're dispatching each individual resource. So different things are happening in those different time frames. Yeah. Does that help you?
It does.
Okay.
And both market decisions there are made from the same set of bids that the resources offer, or do they submit separate bids for each of those?
It is the same set of bids. What gets adjusted or fine-tuned is that demand forecast as we get closer and closer to real time. So the 15-minute market has a certain demand forecast that it's basing its instructions on, and then as we get closer, the 5-minute market will have different set of instructions or different forecasts, more fine-tuned, but the bids that are submitted are hourly, in the hourly time frame, and those are submitted, and the same set of bids are used for both activity.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, sure thing.
I don't see any other hands at this time, but we do have a break scheduled from 10:20 to 10:30 if you wanted to start that.
I think that'd be good. Maybe let's take it early so that we have enough time in the pricing section. So yeah, let's take our 10-minute break here. What is it, just about to be 10:15? So if we can come back at 10:25, if you want to pause the recording, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. All right, it is 10:25 and we are back. Thank you for starting up the recording again. I see a question in the chat. Milos, I'm hoping you can help me with this one. How will the market clearing price set within individual BAs in the EDAM interact with the market-wide clearing price set in the real time? I don't know if, Milos, are you back? I don't think he's back yet. We'll hold that for just a sec, Michelle, and we'll check in with Milos. I want to make sure I know, and I don't 100% know. All right, so let's take a look at pricing. Oops, Milos is having an audio issue. Okay. Milos, maybe if you're having an audio issue, maybe you could type your answer there in the chat if it's not too long. Otherwise, we'll wait for you.
Yeah, this is Milos. Sorry, I had an audio issue. I had to switch from my computer to my phone.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so in the day-ahead time frame, you know, and I think you'll get to this a bit later, Radha, but there are day-ahead settlements. In the EDAM, there'll be a day-ahead settlement and then a real-time settlement. So in the day-ahead, resources will be settled at the day-ahead price, and then real-time will be settled at the real-time price to the extent that there are any changes in the awards as those resources rebid into the real-time market. So I think you'll get to that, Radha, right, a bit later when you're talking about settlements, but that's the way that they interact. There's a day-ahead settlement and then a separate real-time settlement will occur to the extent that there are any changes in how the resource is committed in day-ahead and how it's dispatched in real time. And that could be impacted by a number of things, like Radha mentioned already. You know, day-ahead day-ahead awards occur and the market clearing occurs based upon the day-ahead forecast, day-ahead conditions, and then as you get into real time, there are a bit more refinements in those forecasts. You have better certainty of the load, and maybe there are changes in system topology or outages or other things that occur between day-ahead and real time. Other uncertainty materializes. So there is the possibility that how a resource is committed in the day-ahead time frame may change in real time, but settlements occur based on those day-ahead and the real-time prices.
Okay, so there's no plan to change real time to have different energy prices based on the footprint. We'll still have the same market-wide energy price in real time.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sure thing. When we get to the settlements piece, I'll show you how that works out. I wasn't sure on that last nuance, which is why I wanted to tap into you. So thanks, Milos. And yes, I'll explain that a little bit further when we get to the end of my section. When we're talking about settlements, I'll show you how day-ahead settlements and real-time settlements play out. So right now we're going to dive into a pricing section. And we're going to talk about locational marginal pricing, scarcity pricing, and just touch briefly on transmission constraints. There we go. My slides were a bit slow there for a second. All right. So first of all, we'll just start with the tariff definition of locational marginal pricing. Essentially, the marginal cost in dollars per megawatt hours of serving the next increment of demand at that specific price node or P node, consistent with existing transmission constraints and the performance characteristics of resources. So a marginal cost is when we're taking a look at a specific area location on the grid, how much would it cost to serve the next increment of demand at that location? That determines the locational marginal price. And the LMP, or the locational marginal price, has a number of components, and I'll break those down for you in just a moment. But first of all, there's a difference between the way we calculate prices on the supply side versus the demand side. There are thousands of price nodes throughout the system. The way a supply resource has their price calculated is based on where they are physically located on the system. It's called the POI, or the point of interconnection to the grid. So if I'm a generator, I will have a specific price point at my location. Whereas if I'm a load serving entity, if I'm representing demand in the market, then I will have a variety of demand nodes, and I get charged what we call a load aggregation point, which is the average of all of my demand nodes in that specific zone. And I'll kind of show you another way to visualize this as well. So in the ISO, we have what's called nodal pricing. So nodal pricing is where the price that's paid for electricity generated or consumed at a specific location. So we've sprinkled an estimation or an illustration of a variety of generators across the system. So you can see all of these letter G in just kind of random areas, not really aligning with any specific actual resource, but just to give you a flavor of what it might look like. Each of these individual resources has a specific point of interconnection to the grid. Each of them will have a specific nodal price at their LMP, and that's what they get paid when they generate electricity. From a load perspective, load pays the weighted average price of all of their load nodes in the service territory. So if I'm a load serving entity, I have a certain number of load or demand meters. The weighted average of all of that consumption across my entire area, I pay one specific weighted average price for that consumption. There's also the concept of import or export bidding into the ISO footprint. That activity is scheduled at a specific location on the grid. And so that intertie point where our BA is connected to another BA is used as a scheduling point. If I'm an importer, I'm bringing energy into the footprint, and so I'm paying that resource, that price at that specific location. If I'm an exporter, That means that power from the CAISO BA is being sent out to meet demand elsewhere, and so that demand will pay for that consumption at that location. There's a question from Jason. Are service territories a subset of BAs? They can be, but not always. So we are the California ISO BA, and we have, for example, PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison have their own areas, but it may be that a specific BA is small, and so perhaps that entire BA is the full service territory, so it could or could not be broken up into service areas or load aggregation points. It just depends on how that specific BA is structured. So this is how pricing is done between supply and demand. Oh, there was a question. I'll go back to this slide here. Could I explain why payments to generators and load follow these different methods? Yeah, really, it kind of boils down to if I am a load serving entity, it kind of boils down to policy and also probably a little bit of politics. So if I'm a load serving entity, let's say I'm gonna choose California because that's where I live. I live in California. I'm a load serving entity. Let's say I'm Pacific Gas and Electric. I have my load service territory is a large chunk of the state. Now, right now, the way PG&E bills its customers is kind of on a rate-based and over time, right? But not where I'm located. So if I am a PG&E customer in, El Dorado Hills, California, or I'm a PG&E customer in San Francisco, I'm paying the same price for my electricity because I'm a PG&E customer, but not because I'm a PG&E customer in San Francisco. Or it's a way to kind of make sure that ratepayers in certain areas are not disadvantaged or overly paying more than, quote, their share of the electricity that's being generated. So let's say, I have a nice house in a neighborhood that has no power plants next to it, versus, other areas where I've got people living right next to power plants. And so the kind of the goal, it's more from a ratepayer perspective, is we want to make sure we, the industry, has it set up this way to make sure that, everybody is paying a fair price for electricity and not being overly gouged based on where they are located. So it's kind of a decision on that front. I hope that helps. Whereas from a generator perspective, I am actually feeding energy into the grid at a specific location that can be metered very easily to me, my generation, and so that's where I receive payment. And it's kind of just the way that the rates were structured based on the way utilities currently bill their customers. And the way utilities currently bill their customers don't really have a location component. You're in X city, so you pay more than people in this other city. So it turned out to be that we instead have a weighted average price of all of those nodes in that territory, so that kind of it's more equal. I hope that helps, Chris. And then Milos put a note in the chat just to follow up to the previous question to emphasize that, yes, within a balancing area, there could be different load serving entities that have unique service territories. So it doesn't necessarily mean one BA is one service territory. It could be broken up into more. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the components of the locational marginal price. So there's a price that the generator receives, or a weighted average price that the demand is paying, but that price has three different components to it. There's energy, congestion, and losses. As we were talking about today in the day-ahead market and in real time, the energy component is the same across the entire footprint. With the introduction of EDAM in 2026, we will have in day-ahead a BA-specific energy cost. And then factored into that will be congestion cost, and that's essentially related to where you are located on the grid and the type of congestion that's occurring in that particular market interval. Not every node is congested all of the time. It really just depends on how much energy is already flowing to determine whether or not there's any more room on those lines or whether energy needs to flow across in another direction or in another area. And then finally, the losses component, that is really transmission side losses, essentially based on marginal losses. So we have something called loss sensitivity factors that are factored into determining calculated transmission losses as energy flows from my generator across the transmission lines to the actual demand. Loss sensitivity factors determine how much energy is lost in actually just the process of that transmission. And there's factors such as the weather, is it hot or cold, the type of line material, the length of the wire. So it's really more about the physical characteristics and physics of electricity as affected by the weather that will determine losses that occur as that energy is transmitted from generators to demand. And so there's a question in the chat that says, what is the weighting based on? So the weighting is based on the amount of megawatts consumed in each of those specific load locations for the weighted average the price for load. So these three components of the LMP, energy, congestion, and losses, are always a part of the equation. But there's an additional component, the greenhouse gas component, that may or may not be included, and that depends on where the resource is located and whether or not that energy has been deemed delivered to a state that has greenhouse gas compliance regulations. So today, the state of California and the state of Washington have greenhouse gas compliance requirements, and therefore, generators within those states kind of bake into their operating costs the cost of complying with those GHG regulations. However, if I have a resource that's located outside of either Washington or California, and I am bidding my energy into this larger energy imbalance market, I don't know at the moment when I'm submitting my bid whether my energy is going to be used for the state of California or Washington, or used for my own BA, or used for a neighboring BA that does not have a GHG regulation obligation. So there is a voluntary component that these resources can add to their bid if they want their supply to be considered for one of these states or for any state that has a GHG regulation component. So there's this concept called deemed delivered, meaning that after, if I have submitted an economic bid that also includes a GHG adder as a generator, I can do that or not. So it's not mandatory, it's something that I elect to do. If I choose to offer my supply to an area that has GHG regulations, I will put that specific information into my bid, indicating that GHG bid adder. And if after the calculation is done and it shows that my energy was deemed delivered to California or Washington, I will receive an extra component to my LMP, an extra payment that will give me money to essentially comply with the Washington or the California GHG regulations. I have a visual that will kind of explain the voluntary nature of that approach and how that works across a couple of examples. So let's go ahead and walk through those. So my first example, I'm a gas resource, and I've offered part of my resource to the wider GHG footprint with a GHG bid adder. So I'm a 100 megawatt gas resource. I have a 50 megawatt bid. plus a $15 per megawatt hour GHG bid adder, I'm essentially saying I'm offering half of the capacity of my resource to a GHG region. Or I could choose to not offer, maybe I don't want to deal with the GHG regulation obligations. It's just not something I want to choose to do. And so if I don't want to do that, I submit bids into the market, but I do not bid any megawatts into the GHG area, and I do not add a GHG component. Essentially what I'm saying is I am offering 100 megawatts of my resource to the market footprint, but not to any GHG regulated region. And then finally, let's say I'm a wind resource. So I'm offering 100 megawatts of my resource into the market, and I'm also putting in that I would offer 100 megawatts of that resource into a GHG region, but my bid adder is $0 because I don't emit any greenhouse gases. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm offering my whole resource available to a GHG region, but I don't have a GHG cost of compliance if my supply is deemed delivered to that location. So these three different examples are designed to share with you that complying with GHG regulations is something that's voluntary. I can do it on a resource-specific basis. I, as a generator owner, can choose to bid or not bid a GHG component if I want to, or not offer my resource to an area that has GHG regulations. So because we've talked about locational marginal pricing and how it's structured, and also a little bit about GHG, I want to pause here for questions before we go on to additional topics related to pricing. For example, there was a question, does the LMP also have a GHG component? So Miguel, yes, if my energy has been deemed delivered to a region that has GHG compliance regulations, then my price that I receive as the generator for my output will have also a GHG component as well. So that means that while the GHG component is possible, it does not always happen. It's based on whether or not that energy was actually deemed deliver. There was a question that says, is there a scenario where the GHG component is negative? Interestingly enough, today, the way the number is listed, it's in a negative number, but that's just kind of a settlement calculation, and the way we are structuring it for, and I was just watching a presentation on this at the Western Energy and Balance Market Regional Issues Forum yesterday. The policy team was giving a nice explanation of how GHG accounting is going to be done in the future as a positive number to be more kind of visually intuitive. So today, right now, the GHG components are listed as a negative number, but it's really being added to, it's kind of the way our settlement system indicates numbers. A minus is a withdrawal kind of from an account, and so it's a negative number actually means a payment. In the EDAM world, we're going to change the way the GHG component is structured so that it will show up as a positive number and be more intuitive visually. Let's see, Jason had a question. Where do bidders get information about how much to add to its bid to cover GHGs? It's really, I think there are certain requirements. Maybe Milos, you might have some context here that would be helpful. If not, I know that I've read it somewhere. It just hasn't popped into my brain. So Milos, I don't know if you have any context you can add. If not, I'll find out some information and I can circle back with you through the admin team to get you information on that. Milos, any thoughts? All right, I finished writing myself a note. We're either having audio issues with me. Oh,
yeah, I was on mute. But yeah, it might be worth following up. I believe it's associated with the particular GHG regulatory structure and resource type that you have. and it's a bit more unique to the resource type and some of its features.
Okay, yeah, I'll see if I can find out. I haven't really dug into it that deep, Jason. I know the number exists, but I don't know where they figure out what it is. So we'll see if I can find that for you and loop back with you on that. Any other questions about pricing or GHG before we move on to talking about scarcity pricing and transmission constraints and how those affect what the LMPs are? Any hands?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we talked about pricing. There's also some things that affect the price. There's something called scarcity pricing. The goal of that is to reward available suppliers during tight supply conditions. So I'm going to put a visual up here on the screen for you. In a normal situation where we have enough supply to meet demand, energy is flowing, locational marginal prices are being set, we may run into a situation during times of either high demand or low supply where the next available megawatt is not going to help relieve a congested area. And so we enter into a scarcity pricing model. And the goal of this is that higher prices incentivize generators to maximize their output, possibly bring idle or high-priced resources online to supply energy. The higher prices also encourage demand response providers to reduce their usage. So it's not an activity that occurs very often, but there is a mechanism to kind of, when we're in these tight supply conditions or when the grid is under stress during these periods, scarcity pricing is designed to send economic signals to reward available suppliers during these tight system conditions by reflecting the true value of electricity during these stressed times. So that is scarcity pricing. There's also this concept of transmission constraints. So how do transmission constraints affect pricing? The pricing mechanism is designed to reduce congestion to avoid overloading a specific line. So we take a look at what is the rating of that line and what is the cost of the next megawatt. Transmission constraints are the physical or operational limitations of the grid that restrict the flow of electricity from one area to another. These are a critical consideration in ensuring that reliable and efficient operations occur when you're operating the power system. Each transmission line has a maximum capacity based on thermal limits, voltage stability, and other engineering factors. And if we were to exceed those limits, it could either damage the equipment or destabilize the grid. And so the goal of security-constrained unit commitment and security-constrained economic dispatch is to make sure that we are respecting the physical limitations of the system or operating limitations of the system, and the system is not just the transmission system, but also the generating resources as well. So that is how transmission constraints affect pricing. There's a note, Milos has provided some context for the GHG question from a California perspective. So in California, for example, the GHG bid adder is determined based on cost of compliance with California GHG cap and trade program, which is based on the price of carbon allowances. So thank you for that context there, Milos. So that should help answer your question. I believe it was Miguel. Or no, Jason. Your question, Jason, on where bidders. So that's one example of how they would get decide what their GHG component is. So California will have their specifics related to the cap and trade program, and Washington has its program, and it's called cap, and I can't remember what it was, but a little bit different. All right, so that answers that question. Thanks for that. Where are we next? Before we move on to everything up until now that we've talked about is really how the market operates today, the day-ahead market and the real-time market. So now we're going to take a look at how things are changing. So we've laid a foundation and some understanding of how today's market works in the day ahead and the real-time time frame. Now we're going to take a look at how we're going to be switching that up. We have two initiatives that are operating on parallel tracks, the Extended Day Ahead Market, or EDAM, and the Day Ahead Market Enhancements. So let's talk about what the Extended Day Ahead Market is first. Essentially, I spent the morning explaining to you how the Day Ahead Market works, and today that's only in the California BA. There is no other balancing area currently participating in that Day Ahead Market. So the goal of the Extended Day Ahead Market is to extend or open up the Day Ahead Market to our Western Energy Imbalance Market participants, whoever chooses to voluntarily opt in to the EDAM in order to reap those additional benefits of participating in the market from a day-ahead perspective. So opening up the day-ahead market to those WEIM partners who are interested in joining the ISO market operator, our market will manage energy schedules and optimize efficient transfers of energy between those balancing areas that are participating in EDAM. For those WEIM partners who choose to join the Extended Day Ahead Market, this gives them access to a full complement of wholesale energy market services and builds upon the Western Energy Imbalance Market to optimize the commitment of generation a day in advance. So today in WEIM, as I mentioned, it's just an energy imbalance market. So WEIM-based schedules are not settled as part of the market. Just the energy imbalances over and above that base schedule that has been laid out. And so by opening up the day-ahead market to the WEIM partners, it gives them an opportunity to tap into these additional benefits. Some of the benefits of EDAM is that it enhances, supports, and complements this bilateral or direct agreement activity that takes place today and will increase reliability due to greater situational awareness and allow participants to share surplus renewable energy across this broad market footprint. The BAs that choose to join EDAM will still retain their resource planning, their transmission planning, and their reliability functions as they have today with WEIM. Elements of EDAM, so because we're opening up the day-ahead market to a wider set of participants, we're also making some adjustments to the way that day-ahead market works. So just like today's resource sufficiency evaluation that takes place on an hourly basis during real time, a similar analysis will take place in the day-ahead time frame with a daily resource sufficiency evaluation across the full 24-hour time horizon to test whether entities have enough supply to meet their next day's obligations. We have this resource sufficiency evaluation, which gives them an opportunity to cure deficiencies if they exist in order to fully participate in the market. There are a number of state resource adequacy programs across the West that drive supply procurement. And the RSE is a universal adapter that connects entities with varying resource adequacy programs to efficiently commit and dispatch resources. So in EDAM, we do not require that you participate in a specific resource adequacy program. You can be in your own integrated resource plan or in a resource adequacy program such as the Western Resource Adequacy Program. The RSE, the Resource Sufficiency Evaluation, basically will bring all of these entities together who may have different RA programs to efficiently commit and dispatch resources that are offered into the market. So one change to the day-ahead market construct is we're adding a daily resource sufficiency evaluation that looks at the full 24-hour time horizon. Another thing that's happening is that transmission customers and transmission providers are going to make transmission available to the internal transmission system and at interties with other BAs that are in EDAM. Transmission customers can continue to exercise their transmission rights in day ahead and in real time, and the market will seek to redispatch to accommodate the use of those transmission rights. And then finally, we are supporting multiple greenhouse gas regulation areas, as well as making accommodations for non-priced GHG programs. So today, California and Washington have GHG regulation areas, and so we have the market set up to accommodate that. EDAM will also allow for expansion if there are other states that determine a GHG requirement. And at the same time, the objective of the day-ahead market is to both support those existing GHG regulatory structures while at the same time respecting states that don't have a GHG regulatory program at all. So if you are in a state that does not have a GHG component, then the goal is to make sure that the market gets optimized in such a way that those GHG costs do not affect or determine how the resources in that specific area are dispatched. So the day-ahead market will balance the different objectives of the different states across the West. So those are three main components of EDAM, essentially opening up the day-ahead market to a broader footprint and making some configuration changes to that extended day-ahead market to accommodate the Western energy imbalance market participants. And I'm going to move into talking about DAME because that brings in new products, and then I'll give us an opportunity to kind of wrap up and see how those two parallel efforts dovetail with each other, because they are essentially being activated at the same time. So with the day-ahead market enhancements, we are making some changes to the day-ahead market as we are opening it up to a broader footprint. So everything that I talk about here in DAME in this parallel effort is automatically included for those WEIM partners that choose to join EDAM. So today, the ISO day-ahead market has a couple of changes. As part of DAME, we are introducing two new market products. The first is called imbalance reserves, and the second is called reliability capacity. And I'll kind of explain how each one of those works. So I shared with you how the integrated forward market process works, how we take a look at energy bids, how there's bids for ancillary services, how we generate and commit resources, or how we generate awards and commit resources in that IFM process. With the DAME initiative, we're introducing a new imbalance reserve product that will provide a consistent way to evaluate and address uncertainty needs for each of those balancing areas. So the imbalance reserve product has an up or down direction on an hourly basis for each BA. And the way we determine that is based on the forecast for the coming day, as well as the historical uncertainty in the day-ahead load, solar, and wind forecasts. So essentially, we take a look at, and let me tell you how the bids come in. So bids into this product come from participants throughout the market footprint, which maximizes the diversity benefit of participating in the market. So the requirement for either imbalance reserves up or down will be on a balancing area level, and it'll be on an hourly basis. And when we say that it's based on historical uncertainty as well as tomorrow's forecast, there is going to be an analysis over time of between day ahead and real time, your procurement of energy or supply for that area, does it tend to be more or less than what's needed? So there are day ahead awards and schedules, let's say 100 megawatts, a nice round number. In real time, if you're typically procuring about 100 megawatts in day ahead, but in real time demand tends to show up only as 80, then it kind of tends to mean that we're over procuring for that hour, for that specific location. And so if that's the case, based on this historical data, then we'll have an imbalance reserve down requirement for that BA for that hour to bring it down to typically what's needed at 80. Or the reverse could be true. Maybe typically, and 100 megawatts is a small number, I understand, but I'm using it just for conversational purposes. So what if we say that BA typically procures 100, we're typically procuring 100 megawatts of supply for that area, but in real time, we're always over that, 120, 130, 140. So that would indicate that for that hour, we should have an imbalance reserve up requirement. So the goal is essentially how the day-ahead market operates, where we clear bid and supply against bid and demand. We see what happens there, and we take a look at real time and how the demand actually shows up. And the difference between that day-ahead procurement and that real-time actual demand activity will determine whether we're procuring imbalance reserves up in that hour or imbalance reserves down in that hour for that BA. The goal of that is to address the expected range of load or supply uncertainties between the day-ahead and the real-time market. So that hourly analysis that I was talking about determines what's going to be procured in that time period. There will be different reserve types needed for each area, and they can vary from hour to hour across the day. So it's not an every hour thing. It could vary across that. So I'm going to take a pause here because that's imbalance reserves. Before we get into reliability capacity, which is the new way we're structuring RUC, any questions about imbalance reserves and how they work, or any questions about EDAM or DAME in general to what we've covered so far?
I don't see any hands.
Okay. Let me go into the residual unit commitment process and how we're changing that. So if you remember how we procured in RUC, we are changing that a little bit to a new reliability capacity product to ensure that we have enough physical supply that we've scheduled in the day ahead. There is, again, an up or down component to this. Today's RUC process only procures in the upward direction. So today in RUC, we are looking to procure additional capacity based on the demand that is forecasted. But what if the market cleared at a level that's higher than what that load forecast is? So we've reintroduced or we've redesigned RUC to now procure reliability capacity either in the upward or the downward direction. This, again, is going to be an hourly requirement at the balancing area level, and the capacity awards will go to the individual resources that are bidding into the market. So just like with imbalance reserves, reliability capacity bids come from participants across the market footprint. And I've got a nice visual that I can draw here for you that shows how RUC procurement works. So RUC compares the demand forecast to the physical supply that clears the market and does a determination. So the green line that we're drawing here is the physical supply that cleared the IFM. And then if we compare what cleared the integrated forward market process to what the demand forecast for that area is, if the demand forecast is higher than what was procured through IFM, we will have a reliability capacity up requirement in those specific hours for that specific balancing area. And so we will procure additional capacity. We, the market, will procure additional capacity called reliability capacity up from the resources that bid into this product. On the reverse side of the equation, if the forecast for those particular hours is lower than what had cleared in the integrated forward market, then we will procure reliability capacity down which gives them downward dispatch capability, but would not decommit resources. Excuse me. So that gives you a visual representation of how the reliability capacity is going to be procured across the various balancing areas based on what cleared versus the forecast, whether it's higher or lower. That will essentially, we're enhancing the reliability capacity procurement that exists in RUC today, which is only in the upward direction, and giving the opportunity to also have some downward movement as well. So all of these new things that we're doing, the reconfiguration of the day-ahead market, where we're making an adjustment and adding in a daily resource efficiency, where we're adjusting the way the transmission is factored in, and also making sure that we can accommodate multiple GHG regulation areas, and also introducing 2 new market products through the DAME initiative of reliability capacity and imbalance reserves. What that is doing for the participants is providing them with greater economic benefits through the commitment of least cost generation. They essentially enhance the capabilities of the ISO's day-ahead market, opening the door to these benefits across the larger footprint, improved situational awareness across BAs, enhanced reliability through greater situational awareness a day in advance, and also lower greenhouse gas emissions. So that is benefits at a high aggregate level to the industry and for each of the BAs that participate. There's a question: if RUC doesn't currently have reliability capacity down today, what happens now if supply is more than demand forecast? So what will happen now is that in real time, it is likely that those resources, so everything that happens in day ahead is a plan for how the real-time market is going to operate. In real time, if that demand does not show up, then we will not dispatch that supply up to meet that level. So it's in real time, in day ahead, we're kind of going along toward an estimation of what the forecast will be. And that is used to set up the resources to be available for real time. In RUC, if I in day ahead receive an award for RUC, I need to submit my bids into the real time market as energy so that I could be called upon if needed. So if that demand does not show up in real time, I'm not getting called upon. My real-time energy bids won't be accepted. There's another question: to what extent can these benefits be captured in utility resource planning for the longer term? That's a good question. Maybe I'll have Milos answer that one because it's kind of more of a broader question. So Milos, if you wouldn't mind popping off of mute and helping me with the last question. And the question.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no.
Do you want me to read it to you, or?
I can see it. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think it can help in a couple of different ways. It doesn't ultimately reduce the need for parties to plan on a long-term basis effectively, through their resource adequacy or integrated resource plans. But what it can do is it can help inform, I think, the resource composition potentially, because both of these products are open to resources that are flexible and can provide these services, both in balanced reserves as well as reliability capacity up or down, so they can respond quickly to changes in conditions. And that provides additional streams of revenue to the extent that parties have those types of resources available that can respond that quickly. And so it can help inform the long-term resource composition as folks are planning on a seasonal, annual, or a longer-term basis their resource portfolios. And this may depend also upon the composition of resources that they already have, to the extent that they have a lot of renewable intermittent resources where their forecast, their output varies based on forecast. the market is going to look to procure these imbalance reserve and reliability capacity products to help manage some of the uncertainty associated with those intermittent resources. And so it can provide additional sources of value and revenue to the extent that utilities have available resources that can provide these types of services. I think additionally, these types of products, prudent utilities already likely have some of these requirements that build some of these requirements into their, I know the balancing area does, but they build some of these resource and uncertainty requirements already within their day-to-day needs and ancillary service needs, because if they have a lot of intermittent resources on their system or load variability, they need to have already an account for resources that are able to come on quickly and respond to those changes in conditions. What these new products in the context of the day-ahead market will also provide is they can reduce, by taking advantage of the wider diversity benefit across a larger, wider footprint, it can reduce the amount of ancillary services potentially that are associated with these types of uncertainties that they may hold today. And so in the future, under EDAM, there's the concept of diversity benefit that reduces the imbalance reserve requirement for each balancing area because of that wider footprint and availability of supply across the wider footprint. So there's a couple of different benefits. It can, again, inform the resource procurement on a long-term basis to derive economic benefit by being able to provide these services in the market and get paid for it. And then the benefit on the balancing area is that it may reduce what they otherwise, without the market, the type of resources or type of flexibility that they may need to account for, because in the market context, there's that diversity benefit and needing to potentially procure less because of the availability of that supply across a wider footprint to provide and manage this uncertainty. Hopefully that helps, Radha.
Thanks, Milos. Okay, so let's move into the next step here. There's something that I wanted to kind of, as we're talking about as we were talking about all of the different things in the extended day-ahead market and the day-ahead market enhancements, I wanted to kind of bring that discussion together on this particular slide to say, what are all the things I need to keep in mind about kind of what's changing? I had kind of sprinkled in some of these concepts as we brought them up throughout today's session, but there were also some things that we had not discussed, and so I wanted to kind of bring us onto this page here, and essentially what we're saying is, okay, now I'm in WEIM. What do I need to keep in mind if I'm preparing to join EDAM? What are the things that change? So what changes is all loads and resources in EDAM will submit offers, economic or self-schedule. We will no longer have this concept of base schedules. In the WEIM construct, there are resources that are considered to be non-participating, and by that we mean they're not bidding into the market, so they are submitting base schedules. They're essentially saying, here is my schedule for how this resource is going to be operating across this particular day. But that resource does not want to offer anything over and above that economically into the market to be dispatched over and above that level. So if I'm a resource that has chosen to be non-participating, all I'm doing today in EDAM is submitting base schedules. In the future, all I'm doing today in WEIM is submitting base schedules. In the future, if I'm in a BA that chooses to join EDAM, I now need to participate in the market. There's no more base schedules. If I'm load, I'm submitting bids into the day-ahead market to try to lock in a price for a certain amount of my consumption, at a day-ahead price with the understanding that anything over and above that, I will be paying for at the real-time price as my, consumption occurs in real time. From a supply perspective, if I'm a supplier in WEIM today that is a non-participating resource, only submitting base schedules, in the future, I will need to, at minimum, be submitting self-schedules. I don't necessarily have to submit bids economically if I don't want to, but I'm not base scheduling anymore. Now I will be self-scheduling, and I will have that market activity settled at those day-ahead prices. So today in WEIM, there is no ISO market financial settlement activity for those base schedule megawatts. In tomorrow's world with EDAM, my self-schedule of that output would be paid for at the day-ahead prices. So this transitions to or opens up settlement of all day-ahead market transactions in the settlements process. Those are high-level bullet points about the things that are changing. Now let's talk about what stays the same. So today in EDAM, entities continue to retain their resource planning, their transmission planning, and their reliability functions as today. Before we get into the settlements discussion, I wanted to take a moment here to check in with you to see if you have any questions about the market that we've been talking about. So the day-ahead market, the real-time market, or changes coming with EDAM, or any of these new market products, the imbalance reserves, and the reliability capacity. So I'd like to take a moment here to see if you have any additional questions. And for Sienna and those of you that are helping me with this presentation, we've got the market settlements section after this, and then we've got Eric Hildebrandt. I don't see him on the line, so if you can kind of line him up to be ready, because he's going to be on deck in about 20 minutes or so, that would be helpful. So, folks, what questions do you have?
I do not see any hands at this time.
Okay. I'm going to go into our settlements discussion then. And this is going to open up a discussion of the day-ahead settlements that today don't happen in WEIM, but will happen in the future with EDAM, and also answer one of the earlier questions that asked, how will the day-ahead EDAM pricing for different areas affect the real-time market activity of WEIM? And so we have a visual that can show how that works as well. So now let's dive into the market settlements section. In the settlements process, we have market transactions that have taken place in day ahead and in real time, and we settle those directly with the scheduling coordinators who represent these market participants. Settlements are conducted between the scheduling coordinators and the ISO of those that bid into and are awarded by the market, so loads and resources. There are also other aspects of settlements that occur directly with the EDAM entity scheduling coordinator, so that balancing area. And that entity may need to allocate some of those settlements within their own balancing area. If they choose to do that, then information on the allocation of ISO settlements can be found in that EDAM entity's tariff. And so I wanted to kind of show you a visual for how we break down energy settlements across the day ahead and the real-time market activity so that you could see how that works. And so if this chart, I'd like for you to view from the bottom up in this example. And so across the bottom, we've got 5-minute increments. So energy settlements occur in day ahead, in the 15-minute market, and the real-time market. And when we break it down and do the calculations, we are settling energy in 5-minute intervals. And so if we take a look at, let me put this little slice of time here. So if I'm taking a look at this particular hour, we're just going to examine that 5-minute increment there at the beginning of the hour. And I'm going to show you how the energy settlements are calculated in 5-minute intervals across the day ahead and the real-time activity. And so in day ahead, let's say I have been awarded in this particular hour 120 megawatts. And so 120 megawatts will be paid for at whatever that day ahead market price is. So to answer the earlier question, there will be different energy prices across the different DAs that participate in day ahead. So that will have a very specific day ahead LMP for that resource. And then in real time, we will have 15-minute market pricing. So let me back up here for a second. So the day ahead award of 120 megawatts for that particular hour may be increased in real time to 144 megawatts in the 15-minute market interval. And then in the 5-minute interval could be increased additional number of megawatts up to, let's say, 156. So the way this particular settlement would break down, we've got day ahead price, the day ahead price that will be paid for the first 120 megawatts from that resource. And then in real time, the additional 24 megawatts that were asked for in the 15-minute market will be at the FMM price. And then over and above that, the additional 12 megawatts asked for at in the 5-minute interval will be paid for at the 5-minute price. So they kind of line up like pancakes, if you will. There's a day ahead price. Anything extra on the next stack of 15-minute market activity will be the FMM price. And then if there's a third stack for 5-minute interval dispatches, then you'll be paid the 5-minute price. So that's kind of how it breaks down across that time period. And then I wanted just to kind of wrap up a little bit with discussing how settlements works in general. So we have invoices that get sent out to those who owe the market, and payment advices that are sent out to those folks that are receiving money from the market. Those come out every Wednesday for the trading days of the previous Monday through Sunday. And then the following Tuesday, payments are due at 10 a.m. from all of those folks that received invoices, so that we can disperse that money out from the market to everyone who had received a payment advice. They get their payments by 2 p.m. And so that's how the market clearing activity works. There's also a timeline associated with this, and I'm not going to dissect each little bubble on this chart for you, but instead just give you more of a generalization of how things work. Essentially, there's an individual trade date, and the market activity that occurs for that trade date happens across day ahead, happens across the day ahead and the real-time markets. That financial activity gets coded into specific charge codes. That's our terminology. And so there's day ahead charge codes and real-time charge codes for all of that day ahead and real-time activity. Those charge codes are collated together on a specific statement for that individual trade day. That initial statement comes out 9 business days after the trade date. You can see a legend in the bottom right to indicate T for trade day, B for business day, and M for month. So there's a specific statement associated with an individual trade day. There's an opportunity for the folks that receive these statements. If the numbers don't look right, there is a dispute window where they can submit information into the system so that their future statements can be corrected or adjusted if we discover that, in fact, there was an error in the calculation or the number of megawatts that were used, for example. And so there's a settlements timeline where the settlements activity gets calculated and recalculated. There's also an opportunity for additional optional statements. For example, if I have initial statements and then I submitted a dispute that got corrected, but then there's something else that still needs to be corrected, we may have optional statements in the future for that trade date. So that is the most I think I will say about the timeline down there at the bottom, just to kind of explain to you that there's a process, you know, weekly invoices, weekly payment advices, and also a process for individuals to take a look at their statements, and if there's an error, to dispute that process and have that corrected in a future statement. All of these changes are going to be implemented in spring of 2026. And there are many additional ways for you to receive information about the extended day ahead market. There's an EDAM webpage where we are adding information to. For example, there's a 17-minute video on the EDAM website that covers EDAM as a whole. We've kind of dug a little deeper in today's session, explaining to you how the day ahead market and real-time market works today, how we're going to be changing those with the EDAM and DAME initiatives. I shared with you the CAISO reference material document, which is a collection of links. This Western Energy Imbalance Market EDAM webpage is one of those links, but I also included many other pieces of information. For example, there's a link to the Department of Market Monitoring annual report on market performance and issues. We have Eric Hildebrandt from the Department of Market Monitoring, who is on the line now and is up next to share with you an overview of DMM and how that works. I have a link to where you can find those annual reports because often people have questions such as, you know, this was a great overview of how it works, but can you give me an idea of quantities or prices or market activity? What is happening? And so that kind of information is contained in those reports. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask any final questions here before we hand it over to Eric, maybe on anything that that we had just covered. So any questions about EDAM and DAME before we move into market monitoring discussion?
I am not seeing any hands.
No hands raised. Okay, no hands raised and nothing in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And I do believe, yep, there I see Eric is on the line. And so folks, I'd like to, at this time, we're going to turn things over to Eric Hildebrandt. He is the Executive Director of Market Monitoring here, and I'll let him take it away. It's been my pleasure to speak to you about the ISO market, how it works today, and how things are changing in the future. And I thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your questions. And I'll go ahead and be here through the rest of the presentation if you want to send me any additional questions in the chat. But I'll go ahead and, Eric, hand it over to you. Thank you.
Hi, okay, can I check that everybody can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so, all right, it's not letting me start my video. We checked it this morning. I'm logged in slightly differently so I can share my presentation. So I think I'll just proceed then. I'm sorry, I was set up to share video, but I guess I will go to my presentation. Okay, everybody see the title slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, my name is Eric Hildebrandt. I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Market Monitoring, and glad to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you all. I guess our plan is to give you an overview, maybe reintroduce ourselves or introduce ourselves to some new people in terms of the role we play in the ISO markets. And one thing I want to emphasize is, you know, we really are, we would really like, you know, especially states and different participants to view us as a resource for, you know, following the different initiatives, following market performance, And so we play that role with the federal government, with, you know, PUCs. We have a long history of working with the PUC in California, and with the WEIM, you know, we really have been trying to do outreach and would encourage state regulators in the different states to view us as a resource. You know, we're glad to, beyond just the reports that we provide and the presentations, we're glad to have discussions with staff, individually or in groups. So one thing we're looking forward to doing this year is working through Holly and working through the various state, the BOSSer and various state or other regional forums to perhaps give more presentations, or continuing to give presentations like this, and perhaps give some presentations on different topics. So by way more of kind of educational background, offer some optional presentations on that, and we would, you know, gear those specifically to kind of regional entities interested in getting up to speed and following more about the ISO markets and the regional, the effort to establish regional markets. Okay. Okay, so starting with FERC 7 Order 19, that's I think almost 25 years old now, that the federal government, you know, as part of establishing RTOs, it did specify that every independent system operator must have a market monitoring unit, an independent market monitor, and they even went so far as to specify that they have to have a mission statement, which includes the protection of consumers and market participants by the identification and reporting of market design flaws and market power abuses. So the ISO has, you know, incorporated that mission statement in its tariff, Appendix P. Appendix P is where you could find, you know, a detailed kind of outline of the market monitoring unit, its organization, its duties and responsibilities and authorities. And so again, the ISO has modified that slightly, and it's emphasizing that our role is to provide independent oversight and analysis of the markets for the protection of consumers and all market participants by reporting market design flaws, potential rule violations, and market power abuses. So you can see there, and you know, our mission statement does specifically mention, you know, per the federal government, the protection of consumers, but market participants, you know, we really view the best way of doing that is providing, you know, a lot of market transparency to all market participants, looking at market rules, you know, not from any particular entity, but primarily in terms of market efficiency. You know, which rules would promote efficiency best, you know, which again would ultimately benefit consumers and all participants. And finally, making sure there's a level playing field. So that's important to us. You know, we want buyers and sellers and all participants to, you know, have, you know, trust and have faith in the market, that there's a level playing field for all participants. So a lot of our reports and are geared to that end. Okay, so FERC, in a little more detail, they specified 4 key roles of every independent market monitor. And the first is to review and report on the performance of the wholesale markets. And they specifically require quarterly and annual reports. And we do put a lot of effort into quarterly and our annual reports. That's kind of where we bring together a lot of the day-to-day monitoring and analysis that we do of the market. So every quarter we provide a lot of information in the quarterly reports and an annual report. The reports have kind of grown in size over the years. That's largely in response to you know, issues and requests we've had from market participants on certain aspects of the market that they appreciate a lot of transparency on. So the reports have gotten fairly detailed, but a lot of that is, or most of it is, specifically geared to different sectors and their interests. We do try to make the reports we have to appeal to a wide audience. So we try to include kind of an executive summary that could be geared more toward regulators, management, et cetera. And then a lot of the detailed reports, frankly, is designed for staff and participants who dig deeper into the details of the market, all the different aspects that Radha covered of settlements and the different market rules. So if you look at those, they're really designed to appeal to a wide range. Secondly, second key function is to evaluate existing and proposed market rules and provide recommendations on those. So again, I view this kind of follows from the first function, which is to follow the market, analyze it, and report on it. So in the course of that, we sometimes identify potential changes in the market that we would recommend be addressed. And we also then weigh in on the different issues that the ISO is addressing through its stakeholder processes. So in that, we have, if you go to our website, you see a lot of written comments. So we participate along with other stakeholders and really make an effort to submit written comments at every stage of the initiatives so that we can share our thoughts with stakeholders. And we try to do that early in the process as rules are being discussed and developed, so that our input can be incorporated early and not early in the process where it's still developing the proposal, rather than at the end of the process when sometimes it's a little late to make big changes in proposals. So I encourage you to read those, and that's kind of a step where if you are trying to follow one of the different initiatives or changes, we're glad to talk with any participant or regulator and help them understand our perspective on the ISO's proposal, or as well as our comments and perhaps the comments of other entities. So we're glad to have special calls at any time regarding a market issue or anything in our reports, frankly, that you might want more information on. So those two things that's really where we spend the bulk of our time, those first two activities. We do have responsibility to notify FERC when a market participant or the ISO has engaged in conduct that may require investigation. So FERC and the ISO tariff does have some behavioral market rules. The big ones or the primary ones are not providing any false or misleading information, and prohibiting market manipulation in the markets. So, in the course of our monitoring, if we do, we do monitor for that, and would on occasion refer things to the federal government. We have no power to take any action beyond referring things to the federal government. So, and again, that the intent there is to ensure a level playing field for all participants. 99.9% of participants that follow the rules. We want to give them confidence that the rest of the market, is being conducted on a level playing field. And then finally, market monitors can perform, this is kind of an optional function that the federal government allows them to perform, which is to help develop the inputs to the ISO's market power mitigation procedures. A lot of these are the cost-based bids and different resource parameters, that are used by the market software. And the cost-based bids get triggered on some occasions when mitigation is triggered in the ISO software. So we help the ISO with that. The ISO is the primary, has primary or ultimate responsibility for the cost-based bids, but we kind of serve as an agent and are often, frankly, the first point of contact with participants you have any question on that or would like to work to develop a customized cost-based bid for any of their resources. So we are turning now to our organization, we are a internal business unit of the ISO. So FERC allows for two different types of independent market monitors. They can either be internal or external. The external model is more kind of like, think of it as outsourcing to a consulting firm, the market monitoring function. The internal unit, which about half the RTOs have, it's a business unit within the ISO, but as I'll get into later, it's independent from management, the ISO management. It reports directly to the Board of Governors or whatever the governing body is of the RTO. So we're in internal business unit, that dates back. That's the way it's been for 25 years. So we have a long history. We now have 17, I think 18 staff with backgrounds in economics and data analysis. And for me, the big advantage of being internal is that we have access to all the ISOs in the WEIM market and operational data. The markets generate a tremendous amount of data. All the things Rod explained, there's a huge amount of data behind that. And basically we can rely on the ISO's IT department to make sure we have access to all that information on an ongoing basis. And finally, there are advantages. We can collaborate closely with ISO staff on market design and monitoring issues. Again, we try to get involved early in the process, and of course, we can ask questions of the ISO and clarify things internally, which helps a lot in our understanding of the issues. Okay, as I mentioned, we do work a lot with the federal government and their staff on market monitoring and design issues. And when there's a referral, we can do some follow-up with them on that. So federal government is a kind of a key constituency that we work with. We also then, with stakeholders, we, as I mentioned, participate actively and submit written comments in the stakeholder process. As I mentioned, we have a lot of discussions with individual market participants. One thing we've started doing or have been doing for the last, I think, couple years is proactively reaching out to all the WEIM market participants and offering to discuss any special issue that they may have. So this year we'd actually we've made efforts to reach state regulators. As I mentioned, we have been invited and always attend when invited a BOSSER meeting or the WEEB or the RIF meetings. So that's a good venue, but we really, and this year we want to extend our outreach more or redouble it to reach state regulators. The markets are complicated, and we again want to view ourselves as a resource, an independent source of information that state regulators can avail themselves of. So DMM, as I mentioned, we're independent from ISO management as required by federal regulations. The way that's effectuated here at the ISO is we have an oversight committee. There's two, it's two of the Board of Governors are members of that. We have a governing body representative from the Western Energy Markets governing body. And that committee approves our budget, compensation, all administrative issues. So that's how our independence is assured through the governance of the oversight committee. And I may mention, the federal government also, is active in ensuring that the independent market monitors, are truly independent from whatever, they do need to have oversight. So it's kind of a balance between oversight, and independence. So the federal government gets involved in other ISOs where there might have been an issue with independence. So again, in our job, it's while we're overseen by the board, our job is not to effectuate, policies of the board. It's really just to provide our independent recommendations to the Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body. And again, we do that in written form. We meet with them in executive session, and we often provide verbal comments at the Board of Governors and the governing body meetings. So again, I'll just emphasize there, we provide independent recommendations, and you'll see we don't always agree and support with what is ultimately proposed by management to the board and the governing body, and is then approved by the board and the governing body. So that kind of covers our independence and oversight. Keeping an eye on time here. So I think I'll close out with some and leave a few minutes for questions. I just listed here some key Western electricity market issues that we're closely involved with. First one, of course, is the Western energy imbalance market. So looking at our reports, our various reports, we do monitor and report on the performance of the WEIM. One area that we were asked to provide special reports on and analyze closely is the resource sufficiency evaluation. That's kind of a key element of the Western imbalance market. So we spent a lot of time on that evaluation and helping both improve its accuracy and as well as the transparency of that for market participants. And we spent a lot of time, of course, looking at regional transfers between different balancing areas. That's the big source of efficiency improvements and competition that is introduced by the WEIM, is connecting all the different balancing areas together. So we look at those transfers closely. Second one that's become a big issue over the last few years is transmission scheduling priorities. And this, when you talk about a regional market, that becomes important when you're bringing together all the different transmission rights of the different entities participating in the market. So we have been very involved with, monitoring and changes in the rules for exports and imports between different areas, through the market, through the ISO's market, for instance. Wheeling schedules and wheeling rights, that's a big issue. So again, kind of reconciling or integrating kind of the bilateral world of transmission rights with a market like the California ISOs or the WEIM. So there's been a lot of changes, and that's an area where there'll be continued changes in the rules that has an important impact on the market performance. And then one aspect of that is kind of the distinction between firm and non-firm imports and exports. For years, that I think over the last few years, that's become an increasing issue. When there is tight system conditions, which schedules are going to be treated as firm and which would be treated as non-firm and potentially curtailed if that needed to be done. So there's been a lot of work on that in the last few years, more work to go, of course, but I think that has clarified, I think, how a lot of the transmission rights then are resolved in the case of, very tight supply and demand conditions. We're, of course, working a lot and have provided a lot of input on the extended day-ahead market, and we'll spend, a lot of time this year preparing for the launch of that in 2026. So we will serve as the independent market monitor for the extended day-ahead market in the same way that we do serve as the independent market monitor for the current Western imbalance market. We have spent a lot of time in the last few years on batteries and renewable energy market issues. Especially in the last few years, we've seen a huge growth of batteries in California, and we're starting to see that across the West. And those there's a lot of specific issues kind of that need to evolve, modeling issues and different market design issues kind of that we're continuing to look at as batteries grow and more issues become apparent with the growth of batteries. And a key issue there, I guess I'd flag for state regulators is, when you plan, a lot of the resource plans may include batteries and other resources. We spend a lot of time, or one of the issues is, ensuring that batteries are fully charged up and available during those peak or the net load hours in the evening when supply is tightest. So when you're doing a planning study, of course, you can kind of assume batteries are optimally charged up and available. In practice, in a market context, that's more difficult. So that's an issue we've been focused on, is how can we ensure that a large portion of the battery capacity installed is available there under critical conditions. Greenhouse gas issues, those are big for the states that have greenhouse gas programs, as well as other entities that import or export power to those areas. So I don't have time to get into that, but we're actively involved in that. How to incorporate, there's really two elements. One is to incorporate the greenhouse gas costs directly in the market dispatch. And then there's a whole set of issues around just accounting for kind of after the fact, determining or allocating, which resources, were imported or exported to different areas for purposes of the accounting for, say, state programs, accounting for the different emissions of the resources. Resource adequacy programs. California has had one for a long time. We're following RAP, and look forward to having a regional, resource adequacy program. Again, a big emphasis there, I guess I would say, is, again, assessing that when you kind of do planning studies and plan and for resource adequacy, what is the actual availability of those resources on the critical days, the peak days and the critical days throughout the year when you're counting on those resources. So we spend a lot of time on evaluating the availability of resource adequacy capacity. And then finally, we do work a lot on market power mitigation. So frankly, mitigation is pretty low, the frequency of it, and the impact is extremely low throughout the WEIM, which is great. I think what really makes that work is all the transmission between areas that is introduced and made available through the WEIM. The best antidote for market power is competitive markets. So the WEIM is largely competitive and has really increased the competitiveness of markets throughout the region. So I think I will stop there and leave 5 minutes for any questions and wrap up that Rada might want to do. Oh, sorry, and I'll just go to the end. At the end of the slides, which I think are available, I just kind of highlight how you can find our website. You go to market operations, then market monitoring. And then once you get there, you can see access all our quarterly and annual reports, all other special reports, what we're submitting to the different governing bodies and regulatory filings, et cetera. So we want to, that's a resource. We think our written material is a resource, as well as contacting us. So final page here, I give, our website, tariff, my email, and then, we're glad we have a working relationship with a lot of entities, myself, as well as our managers. Ryan Kurlinski is a senior manager. He works more now on the kind of the reporting, the quarterly and annual reports that you'll see. And then Adam Swardley is the manager in market and policy analysis. Adam would typically work more on market design issues and interface with participants on a market design issue. Ryan would be more of the point of contact on something such as ongoing market performance. So I will stop there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate you joining for the DMM overview. I think that's really helpful to rounding out everybody's understanding. I just want to say thank you to Rada and Milos for joining us today as well. And thank you all who have joined us from the States. We really appreciate your participation. And also, again, we want to provide you with the tools that you need, the resources that you need to really digest all of this material. So if you want to follow up with us, if you have any additional questions, please please feel free to reach out to us. You can send emails to Sienna Levine and she will circulate those to the team. Sienna, I'll ask you one more time to add your email address into the chat so everybody has that. But yeah, follow up with any questions. We'd be happy to set up a time to discuss with you or respond to your questions via email, whatever works best for you. And also, I just want to note that if you have any suggestions for how we can improve on this training or follow up on this training, we really appreciate your feedback. We staff that provides staff support to the body of state regulators. They are very interested in receiving your feedback as well. Also, suggestions on how we can improve this going forward. So please feel free to contact Chris Zawara with WEEB staff if you have any suggestions that you'd like to share with the WEEB team or with the BOSSER members themselves. So yeah, let me say before we close that if you did join late and you didn't receive the training materials, also send Sienna an email. She'll follow up with that presentation material, and then also we will follow up with a link to the recording if you want to go back and review this information again. You'll have that link available. Sienna will share that with you as well if we have your email address. So, and following up, you are welcome to share the presentation materials, the recording link with your teams. And again, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your engagement here. All right, and we'll say goodbye. And again, thanks to all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.